with the Bernie or bust movement, for instance, it's the feeling now, and I have people who are constantly trying to convince me of otherwise, but I still have the feeling that Bernie or bust is, for some people, disengagement. And it's that disengagement that is going to keep the conditions exactly the same way it is today, so that when the next progressive comes around, that they are going to face some of the same challenges. And I like what you said in terms of grabbing hold of the levers of power, grabbing hold of the establishment, and even if you can't vote with the Democratic Party, empower the Green Party, empower somebody instead of disengaging. And so I definitely hear what you're saying, but would you convey this in how have you been able to convince people that disengagement is the wrong way to go in this kind of scenario?
Well, let me tell you a little story. I don't know if it fits exactly, but I've been thinking about this last couple of years. I had a student here at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, who was a movement guy, and he said basically voting was irrelevant, and which reminded me of a set of words I saw on a train trestle in England, written by anarchists. It said, "If voting mattered, they'd outlaw it." Okay. Well, I thought about all of the folks who gave their lives to the struggle for the right to vote, and that goes all the way back to the workers' parties and the women's rights organizations and African Americans and Native Americans and others. And I thought, okay, so let's suppose your individual vote doesn't matter. The fact is that you turn out to vote, and I don't even call it a civic duty, it reduces it. It's a civic moment. And you figure out that you're there with all your fellow citizens. That's a moment of empowerment, not simply by the fact that you're voting, but you're turning out with your fellow citizens. And we've got to start figuring out that that's a moment that we need to reproduce in other contexts. We need to remember that we need to create solidarities among ourselves. And turning our backs on the fundamental question of voting is not the way to do it. Well, anyhow, this student of mine ended up getting deeply involved in the effort to block a Walmart coming into downtown Green Bay, and he led this campaign, and he succeeded.
Wow.
And he discovered that he succeeded in part because he was addressing his fellow citizens as voters, not only as people who would turn out to try and block Walmart. He went off to graduate school. He's in graduate school now, studying labor relations, with the idea of either going into labor organizing or actually quite possibly going into politics. And he actually wrote to me and said, "Where should I begin my political career? Do I run for state? If I come back to Wisconsin, do I run for state assembly? Do I go for broke and a higher thing?" But here's a guy who all of a sudden is both movement and voter, what do they call it? Electoral politics. And that's what we have to remember. It isn't just a matter of winning the election. It's also a matter of movement politics. And we have to figure out where we're going, how we're going to recreate those movements. I mean, if I talk about the labor movement, I know the labor movement's up against the wall. There's so much up against the wall that most labor leaders and labor unions, including my own, which was, I'm convinced that they had asked all of us, we would have said endorse Bernie. They jumped to endorse Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
The civil rights movement, is there even a civil rights movement? There are civil rights organizations, and Black Lives Matter, however, is the group that's really putting back on the agenda the imperative of racial equality and racial justice. But these things are happening out there. And what we need to do is have, we have to embrace movement politics, but also not fail to embrace electoral politics. Yeah. And let's not forget, we have come so far. We have won primaries. I'm in the state of Wisconsin.
Yep.
Here in the state of Wisconsin, we have one of the most reactionary governors and legislators going, Scott Walker and the Republicans. But this is also a state in which Bernie Sanders mobilized people and won very nicely in the primary. I can tell you that my students, 18 to 30-year-olds, almost every one of them, whether they were white, Black, Latino, they wanted Bernie. And these are young people who are coming up, and middle-aged and older folks who are getting so angry, and say, well, if we don't win, I'm going, I'm turning my back.
That's interesting.
Impatient. We've got a whole generation of young Sanderistas, I think that's the term that's going around these days.
Let me drill down on some of that.
Hopeful, even if we lose.
Yeah. Let me drill down on some of that, because you've actually said quite a bit there that I think is very pertinent.
Yeah, I'm off on a rant. All right, sorry.
No. I appreciate that. I always appreciate a great rant.